Hello Internet, I'm Dan.
And I'm Chaz. This is Wine is Serious Business episode 222.
223.
223. I had
We're
it
here,
right.
we're here today with some guests we've been working on getting on the show for quite a while now. Really happy this finally turned out. Paul Durant and Libby Clow from Durant Vineyards, Redridge Farms, here today to talk about wine and olive oil. Quick start out, while we pour the first wine, why don't you give us just like a couple minutes about what you're most excited about with what you're doing right now. You can talk about the wine, you can talk about the olive oil, mix it up.
Well, I think I'm especially excited to pour these 2012 Pinots. I think there's a lot of hype around them, and it's justifiably so. I mean, it really is a pristine vintage, and these are some of our very best vineyard blocks. We're going to taste some old vine, we're going to taste some younger vine, Pommard clone Pinot Noir, so I'm super excited about those. And then, of course, I'm also the olive oil miller at Redridge and Oregon Olive Mill, and so I'm always proud to showcase these wares because they really are kind of the fruit of my labor and from my hands, and so very excited about that. What about you?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly here for the olive oil. The wine's delicious, but the olive oil is a huge focus for me. It's a new agricultural product for Oregon, and it's a new cultural product for Oregon, and that's just got me really excited.
Yeah, it's cool wine. So looking forward to talking about all of this stuff in more depth. But to start out with, what's the first wine?
So we poured the Bishop. So we're kind of taking this. This is really probably has been traditionally one of our very best vineyard blocks. It's approaching 40 years old. So it's hands down some of the oldest fruit in the Dundee Hills. It's on native rootstock, so it's not grafted. So again, this vineyard's on a slow slide into decay with phylloxera and those sorts of things. And this was really, it's a little bit of history about the vineyard block. This initially went to the Ponzi family, and the Dick Ponzi made wine out of this vineyard block for years and years and years. And when we got ready to repitch the vineyard with phylloxera coming in, the Ponzi's approached us about, why don't we try something maybe a little bit different and try and save that block. And out of that, it's just turned out to be it makes beautiful wine. So we're trying to nurse it along as best we can, and it's traditionally kind of a laggard in the cellar.
Okay.
It shows late, but it evolves into something that's just really beautiful and lush.
That's cool, I think. I mean, I think a lot of things that are cellar aged work really well.
Yeah.
I'm getting like some dark strawberry notes on the nose, like a little bit of strawberry seed and a little bit of like lighter red earth. Knowing that these are from the Dundee Hills, I think the red earth suggestion's kind of in my head.
A little bit of bias.
But I feel like I smell it. It counts for something.
No, I would agree with you. And definitely some dark cherry aromas as well. Definitely a little darkness to this fruit that's typical from Dundee for me. Maybe it's partially the vintage.
Yeah, I think definitely there's some real vintage characteristics showing through. A little bit of a bigger wine. Somewhat a little richer.
Definitely, that sticks out just a little bit on the nose.
Cool.
But smells wonderful, right?
Real nice, just like pleasant and clean in contact, with kind of like evolution of structure, like the tannins come in, but they're really soft, I think. Kind of all the way across. I'm getting a little bit, like the seeds on the strawberry, maybe a little bit of cherry stem coming on there. There's like good, pleasant fruit, really in balance with the structural elements.
Maybe even like a little bit like tart, like pomegranate juice as well. There's a little bit of seediness to it that I like, but the structure of the tannins is really nice. There's good balance. It's definitely a robust wine. Like there's it's a little forward almost across the board, but very nice. So.
Yeah, and I think really, I think the sign of a really great Pinot Noir is something that has complexity, where it's evolving across your palate, and that when you find that, it's pretty special. In a lot of Pinots, sometimes they're just that initial rush of fruit, and then it fades. But you get that rush, but then it kind of evolves across your palate too, and so I think that's characteristic of the vineyard, and also the clone with Pommard.
And I love your strawberry seed descriptor, because
thanks.
I often struggled to sort of figure out exactly what that fruit was that I was getting, or what that fruit character was. And now that's probably all I'm going to taste in here.
Fantastic.
No, and on the nose and on the palate, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's definitely there, right?
Yeah.
I think you all know that. You get the strawberries that aren't quite as big, and the seeds are dense.
Yeah.
Chew them up, but there's a nice sense of richness that really just sits on the center of the palate here. I think that, and you said this Yeah, this was a Isabel wine too, right?
Yeah, Isabel, the winemaker at DuPont. You know, and
Big fans of her.
yeah, we're big fans. She's not, interesting enough, is not a huge fan of Pomard.
Really?
But she's done a great job with this wine,
Yeah.
there's no question about it.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, great texture, great flavors. Really fun to try this stuff. And for those of you who aren't from the Oregon area, like you may have seen like Durant on some bottles coming out more recently, like the Durant Vineyard single vineyard bottlings from some people. But like you said, they've had vineyards in the area for a long time, and many of the older bottlings labeled Dundee Hills, like you've almost certainly got
Yeah.
fruit.
Yeah.
You know, in many Dundee Hill blends going way back.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. My parents started the vineyard when I was just a little kid, and you know, it's just kind of evolved from there. Just kind of the story of the industry in Oregon, you know, just grew up. So
And were they like many of the original pioneers, where it was like quite a blend of grapes when it first went in, and then like
yeah, you
came to
know,
focus, or
well, it was kind of a smattering. We, you know, it's interesting. We had Riesling, and you know, my parents planted an acre of Riesling, a couple acres of Pinot Noir, and some Chardonnay, and that was kind of what they went with. You know, kind of eventually a lot of the Chardonnay came out. We still have
Sure.
a fair amount of Chardonnay that we put back in after we replanted it, but. You know, yeah, it kind of took a while to hone the craft, you know, around finding the right clones and the right site and, you know, the right agronomy, those sorts of things. So,
Right.
yeah.
a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Looking back in Cellar Tracker, I mean, there's a big disparity between the vineyard was planted in '73, right?
Yeah.
When you started planting, but like if you look back in Cellar Tracker, like 2002, 2001ish is when you start to see Durant single vineyard bottlings.
Yeah, so, you know, initially, for years and years and years, you know, we still are, we're growers. You know, we have about 65 acres of wine grapes. You know, we hold back about 40 tons for our own, and, you know, the other 100 and some odd get sold to other winemakers.
Right.
And so, and, you know, my parents were partners in Sokol-Wasser for about 10 years.
Okay.
And so, you know, it's just, and, you know, kind of as things grew up, and we decided to kind of put our own label out there, you know, in the early 2000s. That's when, you know, Durant was a little bit more prominent in on the shelf, so to speak.
Nice.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Now you see a lot of great producers making wine from your guys' fruit.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think it kind of speaks to the evolution of wine makers as well. Kind of like they're really trying to find site expression in wines, and recognizing that vintage variability in Oregon is a good thing. And they should
Absolutely,
reflect
yeah.
that, and not to
Yeah.
go to try and blend for, you know, have a homogeneous kind of very repeatable type wines. And I think that's a reflection of winemakers, and on winemakers learning to how to tack left or tack right depending on the vintage. So
Right.
yeah, it's really a credit to them.
And consumers getting to a point where they can appreciate it as
Yeah,
well.
true.
Yeah, you just
Yeah.
took it out of my mouth. I mean, like you were just talking about, you were just kind of saying about developing that with olive oil, but it's
Yeah.
been really fun to see, and I guess we're even a part of it, just as consumers that
Absolutely.
learn to appreciate vintage variation, and even, you know, look forward to seeing how our favorite producers evolve from year to year.
Yep.
So that's been a lot. So, you know, you're focused on the olive oil as well too, but what wine out of their lineup first caught your attention where you're like, oh man,
Okay, it would
I'm
be
really into
Bishop.
this one?
It would
Oh,
be the
all
Bishop.
right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. Old vines, bring it home. It's good
They
stuff.
do.
Really do.
Yeah, for sure.
So do a little rinse here for you.
Okay.
But the next one we've got in the lineup is the 2012 Durant Vineyards Olivia Grace.
Olivia
So,
Grace.
Yeah, what's the difference here?
So this, you know, and all our vineyard blocks are named after either people or some sort of characteristic of the site. Bishop was actually, the Bishop block was owned by the Bishop family, hence the name of that block. Originally it was planted to hazelnuts. And then this block is named after my daughter, Olivia
Oh,
Grace.
fantastic.
We call it OG, original gangster.
Yeah, that's
So,
nice.
but this is kind of interesting because now we're going to a block that was planted in 2007, and versus, so it's a young block. I think the fruit expression in this younger Pinot Noir is very characteristic of it being younger vine.
Right. And then the winemaker on this is?
Winemaker of this is Chad Stock. You know, Chad has a label, Minimus, and
Yeah,
you know,
nice
very
cool
much,
wine.
really pushing the boundaries of winemaking, but also has a very much of a classic approach to winemaking too, and really knows his craft. And the guy's an innovator, you know, which is great. And he, you know, this is our coldest site. We've struggled to get the fruit ripe here year after year. And Chad kind of came in. He's working with us on some techniques in the vineyard, which I always appreciate from
cool.
winemakers. And then Chad did an interesting thing here. We kind of thought about the wines, and so he fermented these in wood, which is interesting. You know, most primary ferments are done, you know, either in plastic fermenters or something, or maybe in large wood vats, but it's very expensive to do. So Chad, you know, being attention to detail and trying to look for different ways, we popped the heads off of puncheons,
Okay.
you know, 500-liter barrels, and primary fermentation was done in a puncheon, which brought a little bit more of the fruit forward into the wine and also gave it a little bit more texture. So
Okay, awesome. I mean, right off the bat, the nose is completely different from the Bishop, right?
Way different.
Definitely more fruity, but there's also like a great, like almost umami characteristic to it, like a little bit of like richness, but it's, I hate to call it soy, it's like just the umami, like the, yeah.
Without
yeah.
being salty though,
Yeah,
right?
well,
Kind
yeah.
of like that darker, savory.
Yes, there's just a hint of that, and I like that.
I would put it less eloquently than umami and start talking about sweat,
Sure.
Okay.
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm getting like a little floral element there too, kind of like the dried hibiscus when you get the herbal teas. Like I get some of that.
Nice.
But a lighter nose I feel than the previous,
Yeah.
like lighter in character.
Yeah,
Still plenty of
a little
intensity.
punch,
but,
yeah. It smells really good. I like the way it smells quite a bit.
And this one's light all the way across the palate, right? It's like soft, but the acidity gives it like these like higher crisp notes, kind of like young cherries. A little bit of that tart edge going on
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
That keeps things bright and clean.
And the tannins aren't as forward in this wine as the
No.
the Bishop, right? Definitely not as forceful, and that sort of lets the fruit hang on the palate and almost adds a little bit more length to it. Really neat wine.
A real sense of elegance to this, man, and like it makes so much sense saying that this comes from a colder site, because blind, I would never guess this to be a 12,
Yeah.
right? Because it doesn't have like those dark fruits or
Right.
more of that weight.
Yeah.
This takes like actually it reminds me of some of the 11s that I've liked quite a
Mhm.
bit, where it's just got that light, crisp character, but the fruit's still mature and really enjoyable. It sticks around for a long time in the palate too.
Totally agree. Yeah.
So when we were setting up for this, I think one of the coolest things that you were talking about is that you're making an effort with the winemakers you work with to try and pair them to the sites.
Yeah.
And why don't you talk, I guess, a little bit more about that? Like,
Well, I think, you know, part of our experience with having dealt with so many winemakers is there's clearly matching winemakers to the potential of a vineyard block. And we have such diverse topography throughout really the Dundee Hills. You know, they're all different, and the soils are thin and thick, and some are virgin and some have been farmed, and there's microclimates. And so what's kind of come out of that, having worked with so many of these guys over the years, is like, you know, when they put the key in the lock, are they going to get the booby prize, or can they open up and get the Corvette? And there's definitely a talent there to like consistently get the Corvette. And so kind of out of that, we have tried to work with winemakers and identify sites that we think resonate with their winemaking style. And we've moved winemakers around that work for us. We've moved around different spots on the hill to try and find a good match. And it's just been a great process. And winemakers are all different and they're unique, and you got to respect kind of their talents and try and match to them. And so we have about 6 winemakers that are all working on specific vineyard sites for us. Chad makes wine actually off 3 of our vineyard sites, so he's our biggest Pinot Noir maker. I think again it's a little bit of a testament to Chad about how he can morph or tailor his winemaking to a vineyard site really well. So we're singing your praises here, Chad.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is absolutely delicious wine. I mean,
it totally is. Yeah.
especially it's fantastic.
Yeah, and the lineup is pretty great. So we talked about 2 that you've got. You want to name? Well, what you know the other 4 offhand?
Well, so we have
Shout outs to those guys.
yeah. So we Dean Fisher's made Pinot Noir for us for a number of years, as well as Chardonnay. Marcus Goodfellow makes a Pinot for us. Obviously, Isabel makes some. Joe Dobbs makes some Pinot Noir for us as well.
Jesse.
And Jesse Lang. Jesse Lang
All right.
has made some Pinot for us the last 2 years, and he has made Pinot Gris for us as long as I can remember. As long as we've been making wines under our label, the Langs have been making Pinot Gris, and the Langs have a special knack for Pinot Gris. There's no doubt about it. It's
Cool.
They do a beautiful job with Gris, and I think it's a reflection of a little bit of their history with
And
it.
man, I've just been opening up to that grape in the last couple of years. Like, I've got a really hard time with it in general, but I agree with you that like when
When
it's
the Riesling, right?
yeah, when the
Yeah.
Grie's like right on, some stuff comes out that just isn't there in 3/4 of the bottles that you
Right.
try.
Well, and I think, you know, the Langs, you know, and I was just, they're getting ready to bottle. I just met with Don today and tasted some of the Gris, and it's like, it's a little, you know, it should be a food wine. It should have good acidity and good, it shouldn't be a big melon ball, you know, with a lot of overly done tropical notes.
Mhm.
And so we really gravitate to more of those acidic side of the Pinot Gris, you know, pick it at 20 bricks or 21, you know, it doesn't have to be up there 24, 25, and I think it makes a much better wine. It has much better ageability of it as well. I'm always spooked when you see like a Pinot Gris on a wine list that's like you know, it's 4 years old. It's like, ooh, you know.
Right,
yeah,
sometimes.
Rolling the
yeah,
dice.
It's rolling the dice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Unless, you know, maybe it's from Trimbach.
Yeah,
Or something
well,
like
exactly.
that.
You know, but if there's a, you know, yeah, who knows? So.
Well, it's obvious that wine can age. I mean, we've had some older examples of
Yeah,
Pinot Gris that
actually,
have
yeah.
held up.
Shout out to Irene. Yeah.
Mhm.
Shout out to
Make it
Irene,
happen,
shout out to
yeah.
Johan. I mean,
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So, all
Well,
right.
and I think that those guys, they know what they're doing. You know,
Yeah.
no question about it.
Yeah. And so so Paul also organized the Chardonnay Symposium, which I was fortunate enough to attend this last weekend. It was a great time. One of the quotes that I really remembered from that is I forgot exactly, but someone was talking about how white wine in Oregon has been, for a large part of our history, been almost a loss leader even, or something that you can just do high yield, high profit margins on, and that the really good stuff isn't going to come out until you treat it like a premier grape and not a bulk grape. And I think Pinot Gris has suffered from the downside of that for
No
many
question
years.
about it.
That's good, Josh.
And
Yeah, well, I think
that would make sense.
Josh talked about that. I think, you know, David.
I think it was a
You
theme
know, a
that sort of
theme, like,
resonated throughout.
You gotta be, if you wanna make great Chardonnay, you know, you need to be planting it on great vineyard sites. You can't be
Right.
treating it as the, kind of the weak, you know, afterthought of like, I need a white wine in my lineup. So,
Yeah, so I think Gris benefits from the same treatment. So
Yep.
we'll wrap up the focus on the wines with that. We're going to move on to the olive oils. You've been pretty quiet so far. Like, why don't you talk a little bit about what's going on with the olive oils at Redridge Farms, kind of in general, and then specifically about the first one we're going to taste.
Sure. Well, this is definitely, as I said earlier, a new agricultural product for us here in Oregon, and the Durants, with their pioneering wine spirit, have translated that then into olives. In 2005, they planted their first olive trees, experimental grow, and that has grown from 2,000 trees to 13,000 over the years. So we have
Cool.
13,000 trees planted on the property, over 17 acres. A lot of different varietals planted, but we're honing in on what varietals do better in this climate.
yeah, it's
And-
been a challenge, no
Yeah.
question about it.
Yeah.
Can you name one that does not work?
Well,
We're gonna
after
taste
this,
one.
we're
Oh, really? Okay.
We're gonna taste one
I
that
think-
does really.
yeah, so Koroneiki, which is this warm Greek varietal,
Sure.
I love the oil. I mean, it's a beautiful oil, and you don't really ever see it on the grocery store shelf. And it's unique. It's fun to mill.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are olives that are not so fun to mill, and there's olives that are really fun. It's really great to work with the fruit. But
We got to go off on that tangent. What on earth does that mean? What's a
What's
fun to mill olive?
well, so there's times when you're in the mill, and it's just torture. You know, it's like it goes really slow, and it's really tedious.
Like the
And-
machine clog up and you got to do work
Well,
on
it's
that?
like
or
you gotta be, it has to go, not to get into the whole process
I
of
go
milling,
for it,
but
yeah.
it just maybe you're not getting the right flavors you want, and the
Oh,
yield is really
okay.
bad, or the oils really has a lot of sediment in it. But with Koroneiki, it's like, man, you grind that up and it hits that malaxation tank, and it's like it gets up to just right around 22 degrees C, and it's like, bam,
There's
just
your oil.
there's the
Right
oil,
there.
and it's like a ribbon just sitting right there, and you go, oh, I'm gonna kill it here.
yeah.
And then you know, it's by the time you run it through the centrifuges, and then it's coming out of that,
Clean and
comes out
beautiful.
clean and beautiful, and it's like
Right.
it pours off the last centrifuge, and you're just going. You know, the worst thing is when you're milling in there and you're just sitting there and it's just like it's going really slow, and you're like, I've made like maybe 40 gallons, and that's all I've made in a shift, and you're like, this really
Yeah,
blows.
those are different varietals. They carry
Right, it's
different.
depressing.
It's
totally
depressing.
different
Yeah,
textures
yeah,
and
I get
different
it.
Sure.
contents of oil.
Yeah, and then you're trying to tweak the mill, and you're like, oh, let's try this, we'll pull this apart, and you have all this downtime, and it's just, so Koroneiki has generally been pretty fun pretty fun to do. But
Really hard to grow.
But really hard to
Yeah,
grow in
all
Oregon.
right.
Which maybe is
So-
what makes it so delicious too.
Yeah.
It's that sort of labor versus.
And that's the rightmost glass here, right?
Leftmost
That's
glass.
The leftmost
Yep,
glass.
leftmost
all right.
glass. So the Koroneiki is indigenous to the island of Crete. This is a monocultivar oil, so one specific cultivar in this oil. It really doesn't do well outside of that microclimate. I mean, you could go into mainland Greece and they have issues growing Koroneiki there. So we're not alone in that difficulty. We just have maybe a little bit more difficulty in our non-Mediterranean climate.
Yeah.
But
And I think, yeah, just also to let you know too, so we, obviously we can't grow enough olives on our property with the trees we have. So we work with farmers through Northern California, and so we bring fruit up, to kind of complement our own. But it's a big part of, having to source some fruit, and you got to work with good guys.
so
Did you try and breathe a little bit of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, I
I
taste
breathed
it.
some of it, yeah.
I did
Yeah.
that earlier. That's tough. Yeah.
So when you're tasting an extra virgin olive oil and you're trying to really tell if you have a fresh oil, there are three things you want to look for. There should be a bitter
Alright.
component, there should be a fruity component, and a pungency or pepperiness.
Okay.
That's more of a
Pepper.
sensation than a flavor. So
Yeah.
it could be like the way black pepper feels in the back of your throat, or it could be something more like a jalapeno. Those are the three things you really want to find. If you find that in your oil when you take it off of a shelf, you are in good shape. You've got oil that's chemically sound, most likely, that is actually extra virgin, and is fresh.
Okay.
So those are the three things you really want to look for. And this is a really particular oil. One of the traits of the Koroneiki is really sort of a green banana flavor somewhere on the palate, and a nuttiness that is pretty long-lasting.
And the nuttiness really got my attention. Like, I'm not so familiar with green bananas, so that's more of a leap for me to kind of imagine where that comes in. But I definitely get
Yeah.
some of the nutty flavors, and then like the pepper you're talking about. So I stop by the tasting room pretty regularly when I'm out in the valley. We'll give that shout out.
It's a great stop.
It's
yeah.
fantastic, and what makes it even better is that if you've been out tasting wine all day, they're kind of in a central location. It's a great break from your palate to be drinking like acidic alcohol drinks, to go to taste something that's a little richer, a little spicier, a little different flavors. It really refreshes your palate, lets you think about, use kind of the palate thought that you've had going on, and kind of think about what you're drinking and smelling, but try something new, kind of refresh your palate for some more wines.
Absolutely.
So the spice is something I've always liked.
There's
Oh,
one
great.
other really consistent factor with the Koroneiki, and that is a nose of sort of a tomato plant. If you can imagine rubbing your hands through a tomato plant, we'll give that a whiff. You'll see that consistently from year to year in the Koroneiki. That green banana,
Yeah.
tomato plant,
Yeah.
nuttiness. Those are the three things that you'll see again and again and again from year to year.
Olive oil experts. This is all like I'm so out of my element here right now.
Yeah, same here.
But
yeah.
it's good.
But I had a question. Do olives show terroir like grapes do?
Well, that question comes up quite a bit, and I
Okay.
think I suspect it does, but I can't really put my finger on precisely what it does. I think there's just not enough experience with it.
Yeah.
What we definitely do see is climatic influences. So,
Okay.
in general, our fruit is less ripe, so we end up with more of the pungency and bitter components. Our
Okay.
yields are somewhat lower. I mean, typically, like on an Arbequina, if I source that, I'm somewhere around 35 to 40 gallons per ton. That's kind of the rule of thumb.
Okay.
Off our Arbequina, generally, I'm in the mid-20s. So you can see it's just a ripeness factor, but
Sure.
you get more intensity. With the Tuscan varietals, and we'll taste the Tuscan oil, those are maybe a little bit better suited to our climate. And this year I actually yielded in the upper 30s in our own Tuscan oils, which is really, really good. I mean, I would be happy with that with fruit that I source. So I think we're trying to kind of figure it out. And we have olives on the classic Jory soils, and then we have olives planted on woodburn. So it'll be interesting
cool.
over time to kind of
Yeah.
see if there is something there. So
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool. That's a good way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that there is some difference, but I think it's so subtle and so unknown at this point because oils are really just now being looked at as monocultivars traditionally throughout the Mediterranean, the Middle East, North Africa, where these oils have been key to a diet. It's something that's
Sure.
just been a community blend, right? Everyone dumps their olives in, they don't really know what they are, they dump it into a mill, and you consume it and it's fresh and wonderful, but we're just getting to the point where we're picking it out. Ken Durant, Paul's dad, puts it really quite eloquently, that olive oil is now where wine was 40 years ago.
Sure.
Right? You have a red wine and a white wine, and you just decide if you like it or you don't.
Wow.
And
Sure.
that's kind of
Yeah,
how it
that's
all
cool.
started
Cool
out.
thing. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
olive oil's kind of in that place right now. We're beginning to get geeky enough with it to pull out cultivars on their own and begin to understand them. And as time goes on, I think we'll be able to tell some of those really subtle differences. And maybe they won't seem so subtle then.
Yeah.
Sure, probably, yeah, and as
Yeah.
you said, as the culture
Yeah.
evolves too, right, and people are more used to tasting
Absolutely.
the differences,
Yeah, yeah. So the next one up is the Frantoio, and this is an
Right.
Italian varietal. We have this as a component also of a blend we do called the Tuscan, which is Frantoio, Lecchino, and Pendolino. This year we had the opportunity to pull one of those olives out of that blend and get into a monocultivar, which is really special for us to be able to do it. It's the first year that we've been able to do that. The Tuscan varietals, as Paul said earlier, are doing quite well in this climate. They're cold hardy, down to maybe 5
Mhm.
degrees.
Wow, that's pretty, yeah.
So they're really well suited for this climate, and I just think they show really, really beautifully.
I love how this smells, yeah.
Right. This one struck me quite a bit. This
There's a
is-
lot, yeah. It smells like a whole salad almost, right? You got a bunch of different vegetables chopped up in there, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
you got
yeah,
like
yeah.
some greens, some tomatoes, some cucumbers.
It's odd that you say that now, because
Spicy.
now I can totally smell
Right?
it. Like,
Yeah.
Right? Celery leaf. That's
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
ridiculous descriptor.
It's amazing. Yeah, like a little bit of everything.
And so again, you sip this, you aerate it just like you would wine. You want to hit all of those pertinent parts of your palate. Taste the fruitiness, the bitterness, and the pungency. And the pungency on this one acts a lot differently than it does on a lot of the other oil.
Absolutely. Definitely more bitter in the mouth. A little more bitter in the mouth. Not as creamy.
Right.
Or I guess is the last one. I guess there's a little more texture here, a little more bitterness. So
Which works pretty well for me. I'm digging that.
yeah, I like this quite a
Yeah.
bit. This is delicious.
Yeah. And it's one of those that after that you get through the bitterness, you swallow, you start to get some heat, and then a little bit of that creaminess, a little bit of this nuttiness. To me, it's reminiscent of like hazelnut
Okay.
on the palate.
Cool.
Yeah.
Would you cook with this? Would you like do food with it, or like would you like dip like bread? in
I would
this,
do
you know?
everything with it, so you
Okay.
can.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think we're just starting to wrap our heads around. So cooking, heating up of the oils is going to diminish some of the flavor profile a little bit. It doesn't
Right.
really damage the health properties necessarily, the antioxidants, the polyphenols, which are really the reasons why most people are reaching for extra virgin olive oil. But while it does diminish some of the flavor profile, it doesn't get rid of it completely. So
I've noticed that in cooking like starches, like potatoes in particular.
Yeah.
Using a really fine olive oil, you can actually get some of the flavor out of the olive oil into
Absolutely.
your potatoes, and it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Right?
And then if you
Yeah.
really, really just love the flavor, the other thing that we recommend doing is finishing your food with it, right?
Oh.
And then it becomes a seasoning. It
That's
becomes
smart.
a seasoning, and it also becomes something that changes the texture on your palate. So you have this
Yeah.
luscious potato, which
Uh-huh.
you might not ever look at as being luscious.
Yeah, it depends how you
Well,
cook
with
it.
butter
Yeah.
and cream and all of that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
olive oil can bring that sort of characteristic too.
Uh-huh.
And it's really interesting to see too, as you're tasting oils, how salt can adjust or shift some of the bitterness on your palate as well. It's pretty interesting.
Okay, so when we were talking earlier, Paul and Libby said that they had been working on pairings of the wines and the olive oils, which seemed kind of strange to me, starting things out, but on their advice, we decided to check it out when we were preparing for the show here. And I feel like, felt like one of these pairings worked pretty well and was worth talking about.
Yeah, so which one? We're going to rinse these glasses first off.
Yeah.
So go ahead and talk about the pairings you wanted
Yeah.
to do.
Okay, so we're going to try the Arbequina olive oil, which is a Spanish varietal. Also one that's doing fairly well in this climate. Probably the most commonly found varietal of the three that we've tasted throughout the world. It's a really sort of sweet, creamy, almondy oil with a little bit of a pungency on the finish. But what we thought was interesting was looking at how the olive oil can change the flavor profile of your wine. We talk about it a lot with the food, but it's also interesting to see what happens with the flavors that pop on the palate after you've had a little bit of this olive oil.
And Salt and Straw is making some magic with that olive oil and the ice cream.
Oh, yeah, and I think
Absolutely.
kind of a shout out to them. I mean, they have done, with what they've done with local products here out of Oregon is great, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
And they came, when we talked to them initially, they're like, we only want your best stuff. Yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they're great. They're really, really
Yeah, if you haven't tried it, try it. It's totally
Try it.
worth it.
Absolutely.
All right, and so the wine we're drinking with this is the 2012 Chardonnay Raven.
Raven. So another vineyard block crafted by Isabel of the Passant, and obviously Burgundian style Chardonnay. This actually is kind of a combination of stainless steel fermentation as well as a little bit of oak mixed in there. So it's got a little bit of that. We talked about it earlier. You get a little bit of the kind of the creaminess of the malolactic, but it doesn't. It's not forward in the wine at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So the way that we did it earlier was tasting a little lime, a little olive oil, a little wine.
Just kind of go back and forth
Yeah.
between
A little
the
back
two.
and
Yeah.
forth to sort of
Yeah.
understand how they play off of one another.
Awesome.
And you just get a little bit of that barrel character on the nose here.
There's just a touch of oak, but definitely not strong in this. Same thing with the mallow. Like there's a little bit of that influence there, but it's not strong,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Definitely the more the fruit characteristics are more fresh, almost a little on the
Like that golden
sour
apple
side.
and a little bit of light gooseberry, right?
Yeah.
A little bit of that tart.
Smells good. And is that me?
Yeah, totally.
Sorry. I've got mine turned off. No, it's not me.
Oh, somebody else. All right, that's all right.
Uh-oh.
That's makes the same noise as yours. but-
Yes, yeah. But yeah, really nice Chardonnay. Leading into, so taste the Chardonnay
Mhm.
and then taste the olive oil, right?
Yeah. There's definitely a little more fruit on the palate too. I think that yellow apple really comes out. Tart character stays there.
It's weird because there's like the fruit, the appley fruit, the definitely fresher fruit of the wine, and then as the olive oil sort of goes across the palate, it almost completely blankets the palate and just sort of closes everything out.
Mm-hmm.
Once you taste the olive oil.
Mhm.
So.
And when you go back, that's where it gets really interesting. Is that it kind of fills in the base of it and adds richness on the center palate.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of the
Yeah.
fruit, like the lighter, crisper fruit flavors from the wine, persist like right on top of it. They work together.
Yeah. Well, I think this is kind of the cool thing about having done this. This was actually, I did this with the Tolly Paley. I mean, and we kind of went this, and it's like, wow, this is like an eye-opener, but it kind of talks about how, or speaks to the fact that, olive oils complement other foods or other, beverages or whatever. It's kind of, it's meant to be a complementary component that accentuates and really kind of brings forward, maybe more of the subtle notes that you see in some foods,
Absolutely.
Right.
and in this case, wine.
And this kind of is pairing magic, right? Like they both really work so well together. And I remember distinctly thinking when we first tasted this, I'm like, it's nice, but it's so delicate. Like there's some delicacy going on that I wouldn't want to drink it with food. I think you'd lose some of the good stuff. And I was wrong. Yeah, like this totally is a fantastic pairing, and you're getting a better experience with them together, I think, than if you separate them too much. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's strange. They're definitely bringing out some. Like the wine has a sort of a different flavor, but like the pepperiness has brought out more of the olive oil. Yeah, having the two together.
And then you have this interesting compounded mouthfeel on top of all
Absolutely, yeah. Got all that acid, right? From that, but then like the olive oil sort of trying to counteract it,
Right.
like fighting in your mouth. It's
Fighting in your mouth. I never thought a good thing or a bad
in a
thing.
very good way, I guess I should say. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Not like Thunderbird fights in your mouth. That's
It's a whole different fight in your mouth.
What's the most unusual olive oil pairing you've ever made in your life? Is that to either one of you?
I'll throw that to you.
Oh geez, unusual with food? With
Food or
wine?
anything, like, oh man, putting olive oil on, well, this is ridiculous.
Oh man, that's really tough. I
Sure.
think, the ice cream thing blows people's minds all the time.
Okay.
It's
I don't
so
think
good.
it's so weird because you do see that in the Mediterranean quite
Sure.
a bit. But yeah, that's definitely one of those things when you have olive oil with something sweet. I think that's just not necessarily something that we're used to doing at all. So that would probably be one that stands out from a consumer standpoint as being really kind of crazy.
All right.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
you've done,
for me
you
as
talked
well,
about like
yeah.
a pasta, like a
Oh,
olive oil
okay.
filled
Well,
Here we
yes,
go.
I did.
Yeah.
So at Villa Campestri,
I knew you had to have some,
Okay.
yeah,
an
yeah.
olive oil resort just
A what?
outside of Florence, an olive oil resort.
Wow.
Yes.
Yes, they
That's
coined
amazing.
the phrase oleoteca.
What is that?
An
well, it's like an Eno.
an enoteca, but
Oh,
with oil.
enoteca. There we go.
There's an oleo, olive oil.
Exactly.
Wow.
So they're an olive oil resort, self-proclaimed olive oil resort, and they are. Paolo Pasquale, who's the owner of Villa Campestri, is a poet of olive oil, I like to call him.
Nice.
He waxes poetic on olive oil. But I did this really intensive olive oil dinner, and one of the dishes was an olive oil capelletti. It's a stuffed pasta. So they basically took this pasta, I think they took either refrigerated or frozen olive oil to actually fill the olive oil, wrap it up, shape it, and then boil it, of course. And they served it very simply with sea salt and a little more oil. And it was one of those experiences, you bite into this pasta and this warm, fragrant oil just explodes into your mouth. It was just one of the most beautiful and memorable food experiences that I had
Awesome.
there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's really cool.
It's a good story. So any of you are watching that are feeling super ambitious, you can see if you can,
Yeah.
see if you can pull that off.
Yeah.
And a little bit of like olive oil purchasing advice, both from you guys, like say, so we've got, shout out to John, I guess we got some friends living right in the middle of the country along, they can't drive out and pick some up, can they mail order from you guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
All
So
right.
we have a website.
Fantastic.
If you go to redridgefarms.com
Or
or
OregonOliveMill.com.
OregonMill.com, and right there on the website you can go through and you can find all of these oils available for purchase. And we ship, throughout the U.S.
Yeah, it's not booze, you can ship it anywhere,
We
right?
ship it anywhere.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
And if and then just like general education, if you're out in the store looking for olive oil, but like, boy, I want to buy something a little nicer, I'm not going to get the gallons for $5 today, what can you look for that's going to
Price
help you
is
out?
somewhat important. You have to be willing to spend some money on it. Our olive oils retail for $18.95 for 375 milliliters. You can expect to pay that for quality extra virgin olive oil.
But they go a long
Just
way.
anywhere.
too.
Yeah, I mean,
At least
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
At least that.
They
They
really
go
do.
way, way, way beyond that. And then the other thing you want to do is flip your label over and see if there's a harvester milling date on there. You
Yep.
really want to consume your oils.
Because on the back of our label here, not that you can see it, but it has the mill date. So
Yep.
Sure.
we say
We'll take a
Awesome.
picture, we'll
Yep.
cut it in so you guys
Yep.
can see.
Yep, and
Yeah.
olive oil has the same enemies as anything else on this planet.
Yeah.
Oxygen, light, time, and temperature, and time is really the big factor here.
Okay.
When you're looking at a harvest date. So if you can find something that was milled in the last 18 months, you're probably in pretty good shape.
It's a pretty good window.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good
Yep.
window.
Very good window.
Yeah. Cool. So there's some good tips, some olive oil tips, an introduction to like one of the more interesting producers in the Willamette Valley, right? With this combination of products, some great history behind it. We're going to wrap up as we always do. Going to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, we
But
should've,
you
but
get one of you has to ask a question of the audience that we'll get a couple responses to in the comments. Just something you're curious about, people who watch an interview.
I want to know how everybody uses their extra virgin olive oil. That's
Awesome.
what I want to know.
Yeah.
With
Tell
no
us about it.
forewarning, the question's right
Tell us
there.
about it. Throw it on our
She's on the
Facebook
ball.
page, Oregon Olive Mill. We love to get your recipes and ideas.
Man, and they're really like up and coming with that business, like really trying to grow it. So
Yeah.
give them some likes on their Facebook page. Libby's been doing some great work with kind of like outreach, right? You're having a conference this year, Follow Mill
Absolutely,
too, right?
April 26th and 27th out at the Oregon Olive Mill. We will be having a 2-day olive oil focused conference. Day 1 is agronomy focused. We're going to talk about pruning. We're going to talk about growing
Growing,
olives,
yeah.
varietals that do well in cool climates. Second day is going to be more consumer focused. If you just love olive oil, come on out. We'll finish up with a fabulous dinner that will be put on by Vitaly Paley. So keep an eye out on our website, redridgefarms.com, for more information about that, or you can just send me a message on the Oregon Olive Mill Facebook page.
Cool.
Yeah.
thanks so much for coming out.
Yeah, thanks
This
you
has been
guys.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And,
Trying to line this one up for a while, so.
yeah, hope you all enjoyed the show too, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Cheers.